Michael, Faith, can you hear us? I'm hearing them say something, but we can't hear them over there. I think Michael, Faith, you were saying that. Can you say something again? Because I don't think we can hear you on our side. Keep saying something. I can see her, like the screen lights up, so I'm assuming Michael's saying something too, but we can't hear him.
Background.
Oh, here we go. We just heard Michael. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and kick this off. We're letting everyone in. Let's go ahead and start broadcasting. And Tracy, you have it.
Welcome, everyone. This is Tracy Smith. I'm your facilitator for tonight's PCEF Grant Committee meeting. And we are meeting from 6 to 8:30. I'll go over some of the hybrid rules for our meeting. For everyone, if you could, committee meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to comment at around 6:05 p.m. There will be a break around 7 o'clock, and participants will see a break screen, and during that time, there will be no discussion. For our guidelines for virtual and our hybrid meeting, the chat box, please introduce yourself at that time, but at all other times, the PCEF staff will be following up, and it's only hosted for by PCEF staff. So a lot of times, sometimes people expect a response, and please know we won't be giving you a response during the meeting. For committee members only, please raise your hand online, and for those of you here in the studio, I'll see you and I'll call on you. When I ask if there are any questions, please know that I am referring to committee members only, so make sure if you have comments to sign up for public comment. The video will be on for committee members only. Microphones will be muted for the public, and even for committee members, if you could stay muted unless you're speaking. This meeting is being recorded, and we will have closed captioning going and showing subtitles. And at this point, we'll move into introductions. And I'll just, since I'm my first time being in the room with everyone, I'll start with Maria. If you could start introductions.
Hello, Maria Sippin, PCEF committee member, they or she pronouns.
Hi everyone, Ranfis Gentilino Vitoro, he, him committee member.
Good evening, Robin Wang, PCEF committee member, he, him.
Ciara Pressler from Pregame, a strategic planning consultant to PCEF.
Good evening, folks. Sam Brasso, program manager with the Portland Clean Energy Fund.
And James Valdez, he, him pronouns, PCEF staff.
And there are two committee members online. Michael, if you could introduce yourself, and then Faith, if you could follow after Michael.
I'm Michael Eden Hill, PCEF member, he, him pronouns.
Hi, everyone. Faith Graham, she, her pronouns, committee member. Thank you.
We'll move into our agenda. Again, at public comment 6:05, we will have approval of meeting minutes from May 18th and June 2nd.
Oops.
And we will also have the climate improvement plan public comment overview. From there, we'll have at 6:25 public sector feedback, and that will be city council, bureaus, and others. At 6:45, recommended changes to the CIP, including the new strategic program. 7 o'clock, we'll have our break, and back at 7:15, we'll continue with recommended changes to the climate improvement plan. 8:15, we'll have committee roles and accountability, and we'll be leaving at, ending the meeting at 8:30. All right, so Sam, at this point, for approval of the meeting minutes.
Public comment. Did we switch the order? Public comment.
Excuse me, public comment. And did we have anyone in the room, you said?
Do we have anyone in the room interested in providing public comment this evening? Okay.
Oh, somebody just joined. Just a second. Somebody's just joining right now.
And we've got a few folks online. Do we have anyone joining us that is interested in providing public comment online?
There's a yes.
Carol?
Hello, can I speak or?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, hello everyone. My name is Carol Way and I'm a first generation Burmese Karen immigrant, and I'm one of the youth steering committee members for Participatory Budgeting Oregon. I'm not sure if public comment is supposed to align with public testimony, but that's what I wanted to provide today in support of PB as really this novel and innovative process that is youth-led, community-driven, and really brings a voice to communities which have historically been silenced. I think it really aligns with PCEF and its core values, and we would really like you all to consider participatory budgeting as really implemented in this, not only because it has, been groundbreaking in terms of bringing, more deeper community engagement to democracy, but really in alignment of its ideals. And we also have a queen who's another steering committee member who would also like to give some public comment as well. Thank you.
All right, so is there an additional person who would like to give public comment? If so, go ahead. All right, we're going to move on now to approval of minutes.
All right, folks, we shared with you all just recently the committee meeting minutes from May 18th, and then minutes or a summary from the June 2nd committee work session. Wanted to see if folks had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes, and if so, if the committee would like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Happy to make a motion to approve meeting minutes.
Second.
Okay. So maybe I'll just ask, any objections to approving the meeting minutes instead of going to the roll call? It's simple enough. Okay. So meeting minutes approved. Let's go ahead and move on. Thank you. And this is part of us getting in a regular practice of bringing our meeting minutes to you all. Thank you all.
Sam, do you want to continue?
I will continue. All right, y'all.
Point of clarification on meeting notes. So we had the 18th meeting notes, then we had a prior meeting notes for approval, a recommendation to the committee. Is that for a future approval?
Let me go back in the slides here. Say that again.
My
Ramp,
apologies,
please.
I missed that. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, it's for both the 518 and then the June 2nd work session. Great. Okay, we'll get those posted here shortly. So next up here is we just wanted to. This is really going to be a two-part, and what we're going to do here is walk you through an overview of some of the public comment. Obviously, there's quite a bit of it, and so we're going to try to provide a quick summary, in large part, so we could you can get a flavor of it, and we'll dive further into some of those comments as we talk about the summary of changes later in the meeting. Additionally, this first part, we'll talk about the public comments, but there will be another section here where we'll talk about specifically comments related that came from council offices, other city bureaus, and other public sector partners. But first, just reminding us where we are in the context, and I wanted to start with just where we are, because we've gone quite a ways, and I think we've said we're excited in that we're marching on track, and we've done a really great job of doing that. So as you all see, we're here in June, and really this is the first meeting where we're discussing the proposed changes before we come to you all back in next up in July, and in between them we do have a small group meeting on July 6th as well, so we get to dive a little further into your feedback then. As we look and step back and look across, we've done quite a bit of work here, both between kicking this process off in December and then all the rounds of feedback and briefings that we've brought to you all monthly leading up to this evening. And so, again, this is just another visual to show a lot of the work that's happened getting to this point. Tonight, obviously, we'll dive into that. What we're proposing is changes to the May draft of the climate investment plan, with the hope that we get to bring it home here in July, on July 20, in your meeting then. And just as a cumulative, sort of telling the story of what community engagement we've done, the community engagement that's contributed to the feedback that's before you all, there's been quite a bit. It started with our accessibility survey that kicked off our process here, where we asked folks what did they need to participate. We moved into that community visioning and priority stage, where we asked folks what's the kind of climate resilient, climate just Portland that they want to see in 5 years. We got a range of feedback there. And then we moved into a series of roundtables meetings, 24 roundtable meetings, chewing on over 11 topics and convening over 123 participants before we put together and released our preliminary draft in March of the climate investment plan. And in that, we brought in over 500 comments from over about 120 commenters, responding to the initial idea of how we were pulling together all of that feedback that we heard from you all, from folks that participated in our roundtables, our visioning sessions, and then many of the folks that contributed into the program over the past few years. We took that preliminary draft and made adjustments based on the feedback we received then, and released the full draft in April and May, actually May and June of this year. We received over 130 comments, so fewer comments in that full draft, in large part because I think that preliminary draft really solicited all the early feedback as folks got their initial set of eyes on there. And so the comments that came in and we'll discuss this evening are about really fine-tuning the preliminary draft. And so we received that on between May and June. And then through that entire time, we also convened community review panels, 2 different panels, one focused on frontline communities as well as one focused on youth. And June has previously explained sort of a little bit of the process there. I know Rachel can certainly chime in on that, but that was groups that we brought together to really look at the plan in its entirety. Whereas we convened roundtable and subject matter experts to dive into different sections of the plan, the community review panels were intended to look at the plan in its cumulative, in its wholeness, and so we used that as part of and they contributed to the feedback that ultimately is informing the proposed changes we'll present to you all this evening. But diving into just some of that public comment globally, and this is just a handful of pieces that we decided to pull out and just identify, but globally there was a collective just desire for additional edits to improve readability on the plan. There was concern regarding, the equity and climate framework really being framed as community benefit and ensuring that there's community benefit, but there's concern that was community benefit without community leadership, and a feeling that it would result in a sort of a for us without us type of outcome. And there was just a general desire to seek additional clarity and detail across several sections of the plan. And then there was a lot of feedback that we received where folks provided details, criteria, suggestions that were more generally appropriate for future RFPs that would result from this plan. Diving into more funding area specific comments around our SP2, 3, and 4, these are our clean energy and energy efficiency programs focused on multifamily buildings, single family homes, and commercial properties. There's a general feedback around increasing the critical home repair allowance. So this is the portion of funding that would support sort of life, health, safety, and other repairs that folks would need to make in order to invest in those clean energy improvements. On our single family allocation, there is comments around including condominiums and being explicit around condominiums being there, eligible for funding. Within SP5, and this program is focused on our severe weather response, there is a desire to allow both day use and overnight responses during climate emergencies, as well as increasing the funding amount for seismic retrofit projects. Within our transportation decarbonization funding category, there's comments around including electric car sharing as eligible projects. And then within our regenerative ag funding area, there are comments around funding a broader baseline assessment and convening the regenerative ag sector in order to help them develop a North Star. Whereas in many other funding areas, we have a whole host of information and data that's informed how we think about addressing those sectors. Regenerative ag doesn't have that vision. There's not necessarily land use to guide where regenerative ag is going to happen. Further comments on our SP9, this was the program focused on land acquisition. There was comments and desires to make the program's approach and language more inclusive of diverse cultural practices related to land cultivation and food cultivation, particularly from the indigenous community. Within Strategic Program 15, which has now become 16, and this is the one focused on climate-friendly schools, there's a desire to see participatory budgeting explicitly called for, as well as concern for maintaining student leadership throughout that programming. Within the workforce contractor development goals, there is concerns on thresholds that kick in and the level at which different workforce contractor equity related goals would kick in, and really concerns both seeking, in some instances, higher thresholds and in several instances, lower thresholds. And then within the workforce and contractor development grants, there is comments related to and seeking clarification that career development or job retraining is supported within the program for folks interested in changing their careers. So this is just a quick overview of some of those comments, and really I want to acknowledge that we've emailed you all and posted a longer summary of the comments. I'm highlighting a handful here because we're going to come back to them when we talk about some of the changes later on and how they connect to these comments that were shared here. What I'd like to do, in part because we have a pause at the end of this next slide, is I'd like to spend more time diving into some of the public sector feedback on the climate investment plan from our city council, our bureaus, and others, including Portland Public Schools, Metro, or other regional governments, because there's just in this round we saw some more comments from those areas. So just to start with the why, and I'm going to brush over this because I realize I really want to get to the discussion, but there's a recognition that our public sector partners are critical institutions with meaningful opportunities to support substantial emissions reductions as well as create community benefit. Our public sector partners have access to data and information on our public assets that could be utilized to meet our goals, and they can leverage expertise in their institutions to support our goals. So we hosted through both rounds of public comment, we convened our public sector partners and gave guidance around how they can provide feedback to help inform the program. And one of those pieces that we centered is we wanted them to look through and frame their feedback along our equity and climate framework, which was developed with feedback from you all and revised based on public input, and I'll share about that in the next slide. But it's about really speaking to the benefits to frontline communities, about speaking to community leadership, implementation feasibility, climate impact, and then accountability. And the community leadership is a new one that I'm jumping the gun here, but it is a new one that I'll share a little bit more in the next slide. So diving just for clarity, and this in some ways you all are quite familiar with this, but for members of the public, when we talk about the equity and climate framework that informed how we thought through strategic programs and whether a strategic program made sense, these are the questions we elevated and discussed with you all and worked with you all to center. So will the program create clear, significant, measurable benefit to frontline communities? I'm going to skip this next one. I'm going to go to implementation feasibility. Can the program be realistically implemented at scale with existing staff, partners, or contractors in this next 5-year period? Does the program create meaningful and measurable greenhouse gas emissions reductions or sequestration? And then, do accountability mechanisms exist to ensure communities of color, low-income populations, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable communities benefit from the strategic programs? And are these programs additional to existing efforts and additive meaning that, there was always the concern around backfilling budgets. So this one highlighted in purple, community leadership. This is one that we are proposing to add to the climate and equity framework based on the feedback we received through convening our various roundtables as well as our community roundtables. And it's about community leadership. It's framing, does a strategic program have meaningful opportunities for community members to participate in decision making and or provide leadership in program implementation? Does the program invest in building capacity within communities most impacted? And so I promise you all, the next slide is going to pause for you all to have questions, and I want to get to that place where we simmer there for a little bit. But these are just a handful of highlights of comments received by council offices as well as bureaus and public sector partners. I'm going to speak to each of them briefly, our rationale, and then we'll come back and say, how did we do in terms of holding this to our climate and equity framework? One of the comments from Commissioner Mapps's office was to revisit the climate investment plan annually to assess effectiveness and make revisions. I think we think this lines well with some of the tweaks and adjustments we are making to the section focused on accountability. Another comment was dedicate funding to city infrastructure sites such as Portland Parks and Recreation's community centers and fire department buildings. Here, we think some of the adjustments and increased in flexibility we'll discuss later around the severe weather response, clean energy improvements for severe weather response, I think will align well and will align well with some of the desires for Portland Parks and Recreation's community centers and fire department buildings to invest in resilient hubs. There's a desire to support EV charging infrastructure at parks. Now, this is one that can certainly fall within the severe weather response category, but this is one that we didn't necessarily have a specific place for. However, one of the programs we'll be proposing will be focused on providing match to federal funding, and we think this is one of those areas where public sector, and particularly the city, is in a unique position to apply for significant federal funding to support EV charging infrastructure. There's a desire to make the income eligibility for the tree canopy maintenance reserve more flexible, and we'll talk about how we responded to that, responded to that comment directly. There's a desire, and that came from parks. There's a desire to add funding source to be used by bureaus as match to unlock federal and state funds that'll both complement the Portland Clean Energy Fund and make PCEF funds go further. This is one we already directly responded to this by creating a new strategic program, which we'll discuss later. There's a desire to provide funding for active transportation infrastructure improvements. This is one, as you all know, we've wrestled with quite a bit around how do we fund these projects in a way that achieves measurable, meaningful emissions reductions. And so a lot of our focus here is in supporting community-based and our community responsive grants and creating an allocation for them to invest in active transportation investment improvements as they see fit. There's a desire to contribute from Commissioner Mapps's office to Frog Ferry's pilot efforts to launch a ferry service. This is one where we see as more appropriate to be addressed in our community responsive grants. That's how we responded to that. There's an ask to invest in expanding Waterbure's leak detection and repair program for low-income households. It's an important program, and I think that it warrants further conversation. However, the volume was small and didn't necessarily warrant, at least from our perspective in terms of the scale of impact and ability to reduce significant emissions. It was an area that we parked and I think warrants further conversations in the future. Then lastly, and that came from the Water Bureau, lastly, there was a comment and a desire for the program to provide financing to create a city mitigation bank that will offset development impacts to the riparian area. So, which is just the area along rivers when there's development impacts. And here we responded that we did not see a clear understanding or nexus where there's clear and understandable emissions reductions associated with a mitigation bank that's offsetting development impacts. And so we said generally we believe this was out of scope. So I think we can roll back to the slide, but wanted to really, I think the main point here is as we've gone along, we've been briefing on all these different pieces. And I think this is a center point where we could pause and say, these are some of the comments that are coming up to bring that back to you all. you all have seen many of these in our small group briefings, and we've discussed these, but we just wanted a moment to pause, reiterate, have we applied the equity and climate framework well from your perspective? And so I think that's the question here, certainly with regards to feedback we received from our council, bureaus, and other public sector partners. As well, I think it's worthwhile to think through this question as in regards to some of the other feedback we received too.
Does anyone have questions or comments?
Can you go back 2 slides so we can see the framework? So I have a question about the new one, community leadership. That is new, correct?
It is, and we'll discuss it again later, but please welcome the question now too.
I guess, what is the definition of community leadership? One could argue that someone from an agency staff, city is community, right? And therefore, if an agency is leading a program, it's community leadership. I don't think that's the case, but I just wanted to get a better understanding of what, community leadership is.
That's fair. I think when we, and it's worthwhile, it may be in some ways, I'm not going to look to Rachel just yet to put her on the spot, but I think this came from, and it can certainly be, we can reword it and adjust it, but where this came from was our frontline panel that we convened and brought together as they saw the climate and equity framework, and as they iterated on some of the adjustments and feedback we made, there's this broad feeling that when we talked about benefits to frontline communities and focused on that it excluded supporting leadership from those same frontline communities. And there's a fundamental belief that by supporting, centering frontline community leadership, that when we make these investments, we're making them so that they actually land, that they're impactful, that they work, that programs designed for frontline communities without frontline communities may not be as impactful. And so it was important I think the addition there could be some combination of frontline community leadership, but the intent in that community leadership was those most impacted by climate impacts.
I like the addition of the community leadership. I think it's true that it's a challenge in the course of public processes to include diverse frontline community groups. And by diverse, I mean not just one particular demographic or one particular expertise within the community, but building that out. So it's, when we're dealing with timelines, going through the motions, maybe you get 1 or 2, check the box. But I think when we think about and hear community talk about responsible development, they're talking about how do you pull in not just the frontline community member who's going to be impacted by said development, but also your minority contractor association who wants to see those local businesses or diverse businesses that have been historically left out, as well as ensuring, pre-apprenticeship programs or your construction programs to ensure, hey, how are we ensuring local workers on these projects? So rarely do we get all of them together, but I would hope maybe community leadership means frontline communities, but also inclusive of the diversity of stakeholders to improve and enhance a project. I think it's a high litmus test. I think we all kind of expect that as a standard, but that's currently not the case.
Faith?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I wasn't going to comment on this one in particular, this community leadership in particular. I was thinking that the question, at least as posed by you, Sam, was have we correctly, adequately, and smartly applied this equity and climate framework to the various public sector partners and public sector comments that we've received? I think that was your question. And I think also embedded in that question is, does the current plan and the response to those comments also incorporate the, you know, the months and months of feedback that we've been having from this committee at committee meetings? And if that's the question, I just wanted to reflect that I think it's a really fine line to walk, and I think that we've done very well, and I think that the interpretation and the response is really very appropriate. There's nothing that surprises me out of what you just presented. We've seen it and we've been led there along the way. I think the balance that we're trying to find is how do we actually derive the impact that we want out of this fund, which is climate justice and carbon mitigation. And sometimes we do that by leveraging what else is happening in the city and other bureaus and other public bodies. And sometimes we do that by saying it doesn't, we understand that the project that, or the comment that was made is important, but it doesn't seem to be an additional benefit, or it doesn't seem to be driving towards community leadership or community action. And I think those are sometimes probably tough calls to make, but it feels like that there's integrity in the way and the response to this particular framework. So I just wanted to appreciate that, and also to appreciate that I'm not surprised by anything, because I feel like that our feedback as a committee and the way in which it's been brought to us has not left any surprises. So thank you for that. And if I didn't answer the right question, I apologize.
No, you're all answering the right questions. Thank you.
Any additional reflections, comments, questions?
Thank you for going over this and giving us the source of where some of the modifications came from and what groups or roundtables inspired some of the additions. I'd like to add more to the community leadership conversation, where I think we could continue to be expansive on how we interpret community leadership beyond, bureau staffing and leadership, or even nonprofit participation. There's so many more stakeholders and community members who fall outside of those more visible structures of participation, whether you work in the city or whether you work as an advocate or a staff person of a nonprofit. There's so many more people we can reach. Lots more workers, low-income workers, renters, people who are unhoused, and youth, and people who aren't eligible to vote or have been excluded from different forms of city participation. So I think that is vague and broad for a good reason, and we could continue to shape what that looks like, especially with the priority populations and frontline communities that we seek to reach better. So many of these work together, and I'm glad to see them stacked like this, and that we can make time to discuss what these mean to us, but also what they mean to the community members who've weighed in.
Well, any last call for questions or comments on this agenda item? If not, we'll move to the next agenda item, recommended changes to the CIP, and we'll have Sam, and then after Sam will be James.
Okay. And we'll have plenty of discussion as we actually dive into the proposed changes. I think the order of all of this is always a challenge of how do we present this with the time that we have and the sequencing that we have in front of you. But this next bit, before I turn things
Quick
over.
logistical question. So you're going to discuss the changes, and then we have some time to mull it, and then
Correct.
next meeting we'll vote.
Correct.
And then if we vote successfully, then it gets passed to the city council.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. So what we'll do here, before I turn things over to James, what we've got is we broke apart the proposed changes that we're going to walk you all through into two sections. In part, and we're leading with the first, which is the fact that there's a new program that we're proposing in this, and it's not going to be a surprise. I think it makes sense in the context of how the conversations we've had around leveraging the monumental federal opportunity that exists because of the Inflation Reduction Act, because of the infrastructure bill. So but we're going to start there, and then we'll move into the specific changes in the other sections that we've made. And so before I turn things over to James to walk through the primary change, which is the addition of a new strategic program, I want to just acknowledge, I think part of this change here that we've drafted in this first one is the fact that the city is uniquely positioned for many different funding opportunities, and the city is going through a whole host of changes right now. And some of the questions that came up from council offices were, how do we leverage PCEF to be opportunistic for things that come up down the road that allow us to bring funding and bring good things to our city that are in alignment with PCEF values. We heard that in many ways when we talked about the access to fair and flexible capital. A lot of that was, how do you leverage private capital? And so as in many instances, some folks saw that there and some folks didn't. And I think what we wanted to do is be more explicit. We wanted to call it a particular place where city bureaus could do that. And in particular, because we thought that while compared to the rest of the plan, those funding opportunities aren't directly in front of us now. We don't know what they are. That it warranted exploring that and setting that up. And so that's one of the proposed changes here, is a program focused on that. And I'll turn it over to James here to walk you all through this. And you'll see, put the discussion questions at the bottom here, because these are some of the questions we'll bring back to you all later as well. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Sam. So yeah, I'm just going to walk through the framework and structure of what we're calling Strategic Program 15 now, Federal Climate and Equity Grant Opportunities. And so this proposes an allocation of $20 million through city bureaus, leveraging federal grant funding opportunities, really focusing on those that are in alignment with our climate action and the climate emergency work plan, as well as the PCEF goals. So it kind of any proposal that is successfully funded through this would have to have both of those components. Maybe to address one piece really quick up front is that this would be a $20 million allocation that would then result in a $20 million reduction in that fair and flexible access to capital piece in the other part of the CIP. So as Sam kind of teed up here, there really is a transformational opportunity over the coming years that has been enabled through some legislation that passed at the federal level. And so, this is primarily the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but also both of those pieces of legislation are through the lens of the Justice 40 framework, which directs that 40% of all federal funding should benefit environmental justice communities. And there's going to be really dozens of programs coming over the next few years in the form of both grant opportunities and direct incentives, and direction from the federal government to focus on low-income areas and areas that aren't defined as environmental justice communities. And so we see opportunities for additional city investments. Again, additionality is a key piece of this, for renewable energy generation, resilience, energy efficiency, green infrastructure, transportation decarbonization, or safety, that would be eligible to apply for funding from the federal government, and that we could use, or the city could use PCEF grant funding as a match for a component of that larger investment. And so that, will vary based on the exact project. A lot of grant match requirements on federal grants are between 25 and 50%. And some of those opportunities are only available to municipalities. Briefly, I also just want to mention that some of this is actually in response also to public comments that we got from community organizations and the public, where, for an example, in our transportation programs, there was a lot of calls for how can we use e-bikes, for instance, if we don't have adequate, safe transportation infrastructure, or the transportation wallet. How can people really, be expected to access transit opportunities if the sidewalks to get to those transit stops aren't safe? So this would give the city as a whole an opportunity to make further investments that further both decarbonization and safety in some transportation avenues. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so the way that we envision this working is that there would be a proposal or template that city bureaus or offices would fill out for the purpose of leveraging those additional climate-related opportunities. They would be proposals that we oftentimes know have short timeframes for application, or the timeframe for decision-making and then development of a grant application requires pretty fast action. And so we would have that proposal address the different elements of the PCEF priorities and values, but also indicate the amount of funding required and the timeframe in which they need that. This would be a pool of funding made available at the beginning of the CIP that then we would maintain information and resources within kind of the city infrastructure of what portion of that $20 million is currently available at any given time for additional grant opportunities, as well as what's been committed already through pending applications. If an application was successful from a bureau or office, then those funds would be transferred to that entity or agency through an interagency agreement to the recipient bureau. If that grant application was not successful, then that funding would go back kind of into the pool and would be available for another future grant opportunity or for match. And so in terms of outcomes and metrics, you know, we really would be looking to see decarbonization of city buildings, the infrastructure that serves the public, as well as operations of fleets, for instance, throughout Portland. This would also, investments in this area would also yield reduced emissions and pollution from city operations, again, from both potentially transportation-related emissions as well as buildings, and reduce operating costs for city buildings, transportation, fleets, and facilities. Recognizing right now, especially that, you know, there are a lot of constraints on city budgets, and so the opportunity to save money and reduce carbon emissions for the city is really in alignment with both our climate emergency work plan as well as the overall needs of the city. As we develop that template for how city bureaus respond to this opportunity, the bureaus requesting match would have to articulate their draft goal measures as part of that request for match funding. And then once the grant of funding was made, the bureau receiving that funding would be required to finalize those goals prior to the interagency agreement transferring that fund. Go ahead and go next. And so in terms of roles, we really see that, you know, City of Portland bureaus or offices would be able to access funds, or whatever the name is that divisions within the city take as we move to a future form of government, which is coming in the next few years. And then there would be a work group composed of city staff and one of you committee members that would use and apply the Climate Investment Plan, Climate and Equity Framework when reviewing those grant match proposals that come from city bureaus and awarding decisions. And so, as we talked about before, those elements that would be part of that review would be, are there benefits to frontline communities as part of the grant proposal? Is there an opportunity for community leadership or decision-making? What's the feasibility, implementation, and timeline? And what are the climate impact or greenhouse gas reductions associated with that grant? And what are the accountability mechanisms associated with the investment and grant opportunity? And I think that's it. And did I come in under my 10 minutes? Right.
Sam, there were some questions at the beginning of the title page of this particular agenda item. So I just wanted to post these two questions, and then are there any additional or other questions? Faith, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's from your previous comment. If it isn't, if we...
I apologize. I'll take it down.
Oh, thank you.
And just one more addition I'd make is that in addition to grant opportunities, there are also, just as of last week, there was an announcement by the IRS in the direct pay opportunities for municipalities to receive the value of tax credits directly instead of having to go through pass-through partners. And within those, especially for renewable energy and energy efficiency, there's some adders that are available for projects that happen in low-income and environmental justice areas or have certain labor standards. And so that's another kind of portion of this opportunity for investments.
Ranfis?
Yeah, thank you for I think this is seems to be a comment from like council and staff. It seems to be in alignment with some of the feedback from public as you're all sort of framing it here. And I'm glad that PCEF team is being responsive here. I think it's a good demonstration of responsiveness. One thing I think consideration that could strengthen this is just being inclusive of other public sector governments within the Portland metro region. So schools, again, air ventilation, HVAC systems, a lot of DOE money there. Might be just worth consideration around just being inclusive for schools. I know we have a school specific fund, but I think just a kind of a question, would it strengthen the proposal if you included schools into this area? Another thing that I think could potentially strengthen this concept, I know probably more conversation with the committee here. Like, I don't know if it necessarily necessitates for another grant review process. We're now talking about a grant review for another grant review application. But the strength for these applications, they're all based pretty much on a community benefits plan. Like if you're looking at DOE money, EPA money, if there was some kind of, I don't know where PCEF ends or where city staff would have to work, and as well as school districts, but it would behoove anyone not to have some kind of a hub to ensure that public government, private sector, community groups, frontline community groups, all the groups that we typically care about or are looking to evaluate to be are already in sort of working together to develop a community benefit agreement. These agreements and community benefit plans don't come on their own. I would imagine, when we're talking about a community benefit plan from project to project, whether it's a road project, a building, it's probably the same people. The people don't change. So if you had some kind of a hub, some kind of a community benefit plan, community benefit agreement between diverse stakeholders, not only would this fund be accessible, but now you'd be really competitive. So I think just two considerations there. I know this is an idea also within staff, city bureau staff, but could some of the funding ensure that city bureaus, public government are working proactively with community groups to develop a community benefit plan? That, in my opinion, has been the limiting factor for why we haven't seen a lot of funds coming into the state of Oregon, DOE money, aside from staff capacity. So just wanted to kind of share those at least two considerations.
Yeah, thanks for that input. Also just want to highlight something that happened at the state legislature with Department of Energy, which was a bill passed. I don't have the exact number of it, but that does fund kind of a navigator function within Oregon Department of Energy to help community organizations and municipalities sort of coordinate better in application for federal opportunities. And so whether that kind of community benefits agreement framework happens here locally within Portland, or it might even happen more at a state level too, and we'll continue to track and I think be a part of that. But yeah, that's really good feedback. So
yeah, I'll just say I think the community navigator might be more specific to application, but I don't think anyone's really thought through the community benefit plan, community benefit agreement. And that's currently worth 20% for competitive applications. So that's the part
okay.
In my discussions with Odo, they're a little bit behind the curve. Most state agencies and local agencies just have not had the bandwidth to think about a community benefits plan. I think the only group really primed for that is Metro, but that's only on the labor and construction side of things versus the holistic community benefit agreement. So that's, I think, the part that we're a little bit behind on.
Sam?
I think, Ramphis, you present something interesting that I think it's worth us diving into further. I mean, I can say just from examples of working with city bureaus right now, I mean, there are instances where we've gotten feedback from city bureaus that they haven't applied for funding opportunities because of staff capacity. So there is something in there around what is staff capacity to convene folks to kind of create that space to be primed and ready to apply when opportunities come up. that we can certainly kind of kick the tires on and think through more. And I think that would be that cultivating that space where you have labor, contractors, and community, and we don't know what it looks like yet because you don't know when the opportunities come open, but we know that they're going to be coming through. So I think it's something we can go back and try to think through. I think that was a struggle with this from the outset. I think we've always known that these opportunities were going to come down the pike, and yet standing where we are and how we approached the plan and our audit in terms of really coming out of this with the more measurable goals and outcomes here. This feels like this is where we're trying to set up that structure where we can set the path and framework for that. And so I think we can take another go in thinking through what is, how we think through that.
Robin.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say I think this is brilliant. I think it would make Portland put Portland in a very competitive position, being able to provide this matching funding. Because I know a lot of other cities that are also eyeing some of these dollars, they're going to be struggling or have more challenges in raising the matching funds. So I think this is a very appropriate and good use of these funds to help make Portland more competitive, in these funding opportunities. I have two kind of general questions. One is, how was 20 million arrived at? And the question is that too much? Is that too little? And I'm interested to learn more from both this perspective and the perspective of the, I forget which strategic initiative the money's coming from, right? It's being reduced. Something's being reduced by 20 million. So, from both sides' perspective, is it enough or is it too much? And then the second question is more of a general question, detailed question, but the success of this initiative or program is going to be, devil's in the details. And I'm kind of curious, when is an opportunity, for us to comment on or provide input on some of the devil details that this funding will be, deployed. A simple question, just to give an example, is this going to be available on a first come, first served basis? And, that could, if it is, then it could lead to a mad scramble, right? And I would think that the money would be gone in 3 months, or at least committed in, potentially 3 months. So we don't need to answer that right now, but those are the details that I'm kind of curious about. Thanks.
I'll take a go, Robin, at your first answer, at your first question, and then maybe look to James to maybe chime in on the sort of cyclicality of when these funding opportunities come up. But in the nature of how much you can consume. I think one of the places one of the comments that absolutely informed us was from the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I mean, they framed that, one of their asks that they made in their letter was for about 1.5 million a year to have for matched funding. And so we assume they're one institution that's looking for match funding, about 7.5 million over the 5 years. And then you look across parks that are going to have a range of opportunities, our water bureaus and other infrastructure bureaus, and kind of was just a little bit of magic to say that feels like an appropriate starting place. Obviously, it's certainly one of those that it's one of these opportunities that's worth in many ways revisiting and seeing how are these match opportunities being tapped. What does that look like? Are we seeing them? Are we seeing a lot more opportunities now arising, and we want to at some point revisit this 2 years in? But I think given the fact that we don't know how a lot of these funding opportunities are going to shake out, it was a little bit of taking and seeing some interest from PBOT and recognizing there'll be other bureaus that'll be interested in that same realm.
And then to answer some of the sort of process questions, I think we envisioned that this would be a pool that's open and in a way would be first come, first serve. But as we designed this, we have the opportunity to set some guide rails around the maximum amount of that ask. I also think we can come back as we develop the materials of what does that application template look like that the bureaus are filling out. We would definitely share that with the committee. And then we would be able to report, on the activity of this portion of the fund on a regular basis to the committee as well, of what's reserved, what types of projects and grants that is intended to serve, what's been awarded and successfully, is going to move forward, and then what wasn't successful, and that pool of funds would then, receive money where we'd kind of put money aside during the grant application process, and then once the bureau that applied finds out whether or not it was successful, it would either be allocated or come back to the fund. So it maybe depends on both the strength of the proposals that are made, as well as the timing and the maximum amounts that we set. I'd say that's at least a starting point for the framework. Does that help? Or
It helps. I guess my real question is will we as committee members have an opportunity to provide additional feedback on those details? Will there be a time?
Yes, I think we're happy. I mean, I think we're happy to work with the committee. Obviously, in one place, we're certainly asking for committee in regular involvement. I mean, one of the elements of this is being responsive, and because when these opportunities come up, and we're going to try to figure out what feels like an appropriate responsiveness. What we're assuming in the realm of 3 weeks to follow back up and give folks an indication whether they could receive that match funding before they proceed on an application. So there's an ask there for a committee member to be intimately involved in that. And so that's one place. But from a broader framework perspective, we're absolutely happy to work with the committee and bring that back and say, this is the sort of template that we want folks to respond to. Just as a starting point, we are proposing that template's going to line up with the equity and climate framework. So it would be building that out and getting additional details at that preliminary stage before folks make that judgment of, okay, we've got the match now from the city. Let's go ahead and put an application in. So what's fair to ask at that stage?
Thank you.
And Michael asked a question. Oh, actually, I see that comment only came to me, but also he has his hand up. So.
Michael? And after Michael,
Hi.
excuse me, Michael, after your comments, we'll go to break. Go ahead, Michael.
I'm going to ask a question that was asked. I asked Jamie, which was for the government funds in the CIP, will Multnomah County have access to those funds at all, or only the city of Portland as a government agency?
In this proposal here, Michael, at least as the lead entity, we are proposing that it would be the city. I think we're certainly open to talking further on that. I think part of that rationale is the funds need to be invested within the city of Portland, and so when we're talking about our city infrastructure, whether it's our roads. Granted, there are bridges, so that is a different place, but that the county manages. But when we're talking about our roads and a lot of our physical assets, that certainly is within the city. Obviously, we have our allocation for the schools, but we heard Ramphis' point earlier as well. And then there's just how do you make this workable in a way that's fast and responsive? But I think that we're happy to talk through this more.
Yeah, I wasn't one way or the other. I was just curious, because I do work for the county, and I know that we run all the homeless shelters and all the houseless shelters and all the mental health areas in the county and all the kind of health clinics and libraries and all those things that are large community gathering spaces, especially for communities. It's kind of a place of last resort.
Thank you for the libraries, Michael. I hear all those others, but the libraries are ones that I always forget about, just their presence across the community in the same way that schools are present across the community.
And just want to note that there is another area where the county would be eligible to apply for funding, which is the improvements on, for the energy efficiency and renewable energy for severe weather response. The county would be, I got the name of that wrong, but the county would be an eligible applicant in that strategic program for building upgrades.
Which makes sense because the county also runs all of the city's emergency cooling and warming shelters during heat events and cold events.
All right, we'll take a break and come back at 7:15. changes for the climate investment plan.
Okay. What we're going to do here in the next slides is it's the full run of all the changes that we've made. It's a lot. And what I'd like to do is get to the end. And so what I'm going to do is highlight one or two changes from every single slide that I want to just highlight. But encourage you all, as you see something at the end, let's roll back. And if you've got questions about a change that I did not highlight, let's go back. I recognize I'd really like to get to the discussion portion and give you all ample time to talk and spend that time, as opposed to spending the time going through each change. But for members of the public, we will post in the chat a link to where those changes are, where you can find those changes on our website. But we'll walk through them here as well, and you get to at least see them on the slides. So first up is, as we just talk about the global set of changes, the first change, the most important change, which we teed up earlier, was that we added a fifth prompt under the equity and climate framework. And that prompt was community leadership, that a strategic, and again, this, our strategic programs have to affirmatively answer yes to each of those equity and climate framework questions to be considered within the CIP. And so that framework would be important because it's part of what folks would be leaning on as well for that newest strategic program, number 15, focused on leveraging federal funds. And then there's a range of other comments around elaborating on the committee's role or oversight role, reporting timelines, additional sections, or not comments, sorry, we're moving away from comments, adjustments here around elaborating on the committee's oversight role, adding additional sections to the CIP, global changes throughout the document as well. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to move to, what I'm going to do is then move to the next slide and come back as well at the end. Okay. For each of these, I'm going to actually walk through what each of these are, since it's important. Within the climate jobs, workforce, and contractor development section of the climate investment plan, there's 3 changes we're proposing. Number 1 is to add city government entities to be eligible administrators based on the availability of complementary services. So for that 30 million community responsive grants, we want to enable city government entities to potentially administer some of those resources. And in particular, the conversations we've been having have been with Prosper Portland, which administers the Community Opportunities Enhancement Program, as well as the Inclusive Business Resource Network that supports businesses and contractors. And so there is a potential there, and we want to at least leave an opening to explore that potential. The second change proposed here is that we clarified that apprenticeship programs receiving PCEF funding should be fully registered and focused on training for residential heat pump technicians and weatherization technicians, where we've seen the largest gap in a gap in training programs. And then the third change, and a meaningful proposed change, is that we would expand the definition for eligible contractors or businesses that can receive funding to include contractors that not only provide services related to reducing greenhouse gas and sequestering greenhouse gases. So again, not just folks that are installing HVAC equipment, insulation, planting trees, but also contractors that are producing goods. So producing equipment, technology that supports the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that they may be exporting. So they could be producing electric motors, they could be producing solar panels, but just expanding that definition of contractor. Okay. Within the energy efficiency and renewable energy, and I'm gonna acknowledge, I'm not gonna really go through some of the clarifying changes here, but I'm gonna focus just on 2 changes, and it's the last 2 changes on this slide here, with across the energy efficiency and renewable energy category. There's one more slide, but across this section here. And it's on strategic program number 3, focused on single family homes. One of the proposed changes is that we added a new category of eligible households or eligible entities to receive investment. And that's small in-home childcare, so those that are operating daycare and childcare facilities in their homes, as well as those that are operating congregate housing. And we specified that with a goal of 50 homes within that category. In order to accommodate that, we reduced the target for homeowners receiving funding in the program in the 120 to 150% area median income category from $500 to 450. And I think that change was really driven by, we received a range of feedback from a lot of the folks that are engaged in the Preschool for All effort that was passed by within the county a couple of years ago, and recognizing over this next 5-year span, there's going to be additional and increasing need for those preschools, but likely other home-based services, and some of the capacity considerations for those operators are their ability to have efficient cooling and heating in their spaces to expand they're providing those services. Okay. And again, once we get to the end here, happy to move back to anything that I haven't covered. I want to get us to the end first. Within these next two strategic programs, SP4 focused on small commercial buildings, and then SP5 focused on building upgrades for community severe weather response, really two changes I want to focus on. Under SP4, we added other government entities as potentially eligible entities to administer that program based on the availability of complementary services that enhance program delivery. Again, here too, we've largely been in conversations with Prosper Portland, focused on their Prosperity Investment Program. That program is a combination of their Green Features Program as well as their Storefront Improvement Program. They operate that in order to support small businesses with storefront and appliance sort of improvements, and supporting businesses in helping drive foot traffic and improve their financial sustainability. And so I think what we recognize here is we're not sure, but we want to create the possibility to explore those conversations further, where there are synergies, where they may be offering other business related supports, and there may be a potential to say they might make sense to administer that program. So we wanted to create that opening there. And then under SP5, we removed the requirement that limited applicants to those willing to provide overnight shelter. I think there's a recognition that we want it to be more broad or expansive and more flexible as we come out the gate with this program, and that overnight sheltering, and we recognized in some of the feedback we heard that there's value to daytime use, daytime sheltering, and we think that expands the possibility and provides an avenue for more, a greater swath of potential applicants to be supported within this program. However, there still is a priority within this program for institutions that would be creating or opening up their building space for those to be able to shelter during the daytime and overnight. Within transportation decarbonization, I'm not going to touch on anything here. I think these are there's small adjustments here, but I'm going to just move on to our next one. So within green infrastructure, one of the changes I want to highlight here was that we modified and simplified the income qualification for the tree canopy maintenance reserve. There's 2 tiers of income qualification. It was for one tier of income, and I cannot recall the exact number, you'd have the full cost of the tree pruning or maintenance service covered, and for a higher income tier, it'd be a partial cost. We just got feedback that may not be, having those 2 different tiers may not be worth the complexity of administration that it would take to do that. And so what we simplified it and said that that the program would cover up to 100% of pruning or 100% of pruning costs for owner-occupied homes with income up to 100% area median income, prioritizing lower income households. What that would do is it would allow us, recognizing that we don't have a full understanding of the need, it would allow us to focus on those lower income households, but be able to move up and support other households if there is insufficient demand in those lower income households. Okay. Moving to this next one, next slide. In regenerative agriculture on our community responsive grants, one key change there is we added support for a collaborative research, planning, and community engagement process. So we recognize that when we talk about regenerative ag, it's probably one of our funding areas or our sectors that have received the least amount of funding, whether from foundations or federal institutions. It's a sector that is less developed, we would say, and I think that there's a recognition as we went through the climate investment planning process and looking through all the various plans out there, there isn't necessarily a North Star or something else to guide what is our region's vision for how we invest in local food and agricultural production. And so this is to help support some of that collaborative research to understand the availability, the desires, so that it helps us develop some of that North Star and convene folks around that. But that was just an important piece that came out of the some of the engagement efforts, that it's a disparate community of folks that are incredibly committed and passionate, yet there's room there to support that sector with that collaborative research. So we called that out explicitly. Move on. I'm going to move to this next one here, and this may be one of our last slides. I think there's one more slide after this, and we can give the floor to you all. So within here, as you see there, across the categories, there's no changes proposed except as we get down to Strategic Program 14, Access to Fair and Flexible Capital. So the changes here is we reduced the allocation by 20 million and reallocated that funding to the new Strategic Program number 15 that James just previewed for you all earlier. We clarified that all businesses would be eligible with a priority for small businesses. We recognize that there's given the scale of funding and the opportunity to leverage that, we wanted to certainly prioritize smaller businesses, but create more flexibility as we come out the gate and learn within this program. We added public agencies with financing experience as eligible administrators, recognizing that whether it's within the Housing Bureau or Prosper Portland, that there are entities that provide financing that may be worthwhile have further conversations with. And then we clarified that lending institutions, including banks, are eligible to apply to administer funds. And we added CPACE, Commercial Property Size Clean Energy, as a potential financing mechanism, following conversations with Prosper Portland. Okay. All right, got one more slide. Okay, again, we've walked you all through Strategic Program number 15, the new one, but then I want to just briefly talk through Strategic Program number 16, focused on climate-friendly public schools. And this was formerly Strategic Program 15. Partially, we wanted to lump together the programs that were focused on leveraging PCEF funds, so that's why you have numbers 13, 14, and 15 together. Here, the primary change that I want to highlight is that we did add, in recognition of some of the feedback that we've heard, we more explicitly called out participatory budgeting as an eligible and an encouraged means for administering or supporting that program, and we added to incentivize and support about 150. We allocated or provided that allocation of 150,000 per school district for implementing a participatory budgeting process. So there are other changes here and other changes on the previous slides I did not touch on, so I'm happy to go back, but wanted to make sure we worked our way through this and give you all the floor to see where you want to drive the conversation as we move forward. And so I'm going to move to our slide here so you have the questions in front of you all, and turn it back to Tracy and the group.
All right, does anyone want to share any thoughts on Sam's information he presented? Oh, Robin.
Thank you for this summary. I guess three comments. One is a comment, two questions. One is comment is just for the record. I am a contractor with Prosper Portland. It's a drop in a bucket, given what all this stuff that they do, but I am contracted to do some work with their Inclusive Business Resource Network. So just, I don't know how that might involve my role here, but just want to put that out there. Second is, pardon my ignorance, but what's congregate housing?
I'm going to look to Katie because Katie's worked on this. And
Come up here.
It's I mean, it's sort of
Yeah, come to the mic.
like group homes. So a lot of organizations that serve people with intellectual disabilities might own homes, or people with serious neurocognitive disorders, and there's a lot of different kinds of potential congregate housing. Also, a lot of elder care that is in smaller homes, not like the big senior care facilities, but in-home ones.
Okay, thank you. No, that makes sense then. And then I have other questions, but they go into the details. Should we send that to you by email, comments and questions?
Sure. To the extent that you think it's beneficial for the group, I'd say feel free to raise it, but we'll happily take it via email too. To the extent that.
Yeah, these are details stuff, so I'll just email.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Maria?
Are we going to go page by page, or do we just go straight to where? we
Is
need
there a particular slide you would like for us to
I can't
go back
remember.
to?
Can we start with the earlier strategic projects or programs?
I'll start at the very beginning.
Okay, we'll go through the proposed changes that you just ran through.
Oh, sorry, Marie, did you want me to just slowly walk forward through them until?
Yeah, just move through them slowly. I think I'll eventually get to schools, but I want to make sure I didn't miss anything else.
Got it. I'll back up just to make sure we didn't skip over anything here.
Okay. Well, I think with the reduction to the fair and flexible capital, how did you all engage with stakeholders in that area? Did you reconvene a roundtable? Are they aware of the shifts happening? That's one of the areas I was curious about. When you cut that amount, I'm sure folks would have a reaction, or they'll be curious to see what happens long term.
Maria, I think this is going to be the most direct answer. I think we're going to wait to see what that reaction is. We just pushed out the list, and we'll certainly make the folks that attended that roundtable aware of both the new funding area. That's an easy place to start, given the folks that most deeply engaged with the topic with us. But this is the first time we're publicly really discussing it, and certainly this has been live on our website since last week. But
okay, Thank you for that. And then for the climate-friendly schools, thank you for listening to a lot of the comments that have come in. I know a lot of the youth stakeholders I work with have been really interested in seeing how this area would evolve, and it's nice to see the phrasing of participatory budgeting being included, something that I've been trying to echo as much as I could in this space. I am curious, though, about the amount of $150,000 per district. We love to ask, where did that amount come from? Are we locking ourselves in here to an amount that, is pretty arbitrary and maybe is something that the young people might envision should need to grow over time? But can you share a little bit of the rationale behind that amount? And is this an area of the program that would be still up for the youth comments around that, or any of the district stakeholders who've written to you all?
And if I may just add a piggyback question, is that fair? I mean, we got PPS, they're the big school, that's a district, I think. And then we have all these smaller districts. Are they also going to get 150,000? So it just, I don't know, doesn't seem fair.
Could you just ask and answer the question? So I can say that the 150,000 was kind of landed on in reading, doing some research about participatory budgeting. I wish June were here because she was also a part of this conversation and a part of the research that went into it. And then meeting with some folks who are sort of advocates of participatory budgeting, and really seeing that from our perspective, it appeared that when it is done well, it really has to be invested in, right? It's not something that you can do just a little bit. In some ways, if you don't do it well, if you don't invest deeply in the process, then what you end up with is creating a process by which people who have a lot of resources, a lot of time on their hands, and sort of like those kind of usual suspects are the ones who end up coming to the table and guiding the decision making. And so when we were just thinking about a process and thinking about the sort of looking at some examples of the time that was involved and of the sort of consultant or staffing types of support that would be involved, this was an estimate that we came up with for that. I will say that it probably could cost a lot more. But I don't think that it could cost a whole lot less, just to guide the process. That's and we did it just per district, in part because we had really extensive conversations and engagement with all of the districts and with the Department of Education in coming up with the formula by which we did the allocation for the 45 million that went into the physical improvements, into the projects, the implementation projects, that sort of not student-led ones. And we didn't want to monkey around with that too much because there were so many people and stakeholders who had already been involved in that process.
Thank you for giving that background, and I will check in with June about that. I know a lot of materials have come in to share some success stories or some ways this has been implemented in other places like Boston, New York, Seattle. Participatory budgeting is wildly successful when you're trying to improve youth circumstances, especially within schools and districts. I really appreciate everybody listening to a lot of the youth comment. I think they've enjoyed being able to chime into this, even though it feels like it's pretty late in the game, but they don't want to let the opportunity pass where they could potentially add this transformation into a plan that's going to be a big deal for the city. I was aware today that youth had even wrote to city council to make sure council is supportive of staff and the committee in championing this opportunity to include more youth power and youth decision making. So maybe you'll hear from council about that, but I hope too that they hear what the youth have to say. But we'll follow up. I'll follow up with you about some of my questions around the district allocations, as what Robin had asked. Maybe something where we match the need of the district or the size of the district could make more sense. But I also understand that we want an implementable, sizable amount that would be yielding to some level of good transformation. Thank you.
Additional comments, questions, Ranfis?
A couple of comments and a question. Appreciate, I think, the addition of clarity for the workforce pieces on ensuring that they're fully registered apprenticeship programs. I think just encouragement, as you're thinking about funding programs that are weatherization or heat pump technician, just thinking about them holistically, about how you turn those into careers. So, not to say that weatherization or heat pump are boom and bust cycles, but some sectors are. But just trying to think holistically, we have whole host of HVAC ventilation projects, like thinking about how can someone who trains to be a heat pump technician can transfer to those jobs, I think will be really important. Additionally, Intel, through the CHIPS Act, will be doing lots of improvement. That's a lot of pipe heating and cooling. Like those are probably 50, 60-hour wage jobs plus benefits. So, again, heat pump technician, probably around 15, 20 PCEF, and then adding PCEF's wage standard, probably give that a boost. But, again, I think that's just encouragement, thinking like some of those questions moving forward is how do you turn those into careers. So my encouragement continues to be connecting with those apprenticeship programs, especially union apprenticeship programs, to consider that. Same for weatherization. We're talking about insulation. Insulation is included in commercial buildings. There will be a lot of insulation in any Intel project, but how do you think about that? Same with like glass improvement in commercial windows. So how do you go from an entry level position doing weatherization, that's again probably range 15 to 20 outside of PCEF funded projects, into some of these commercial or industrial projects. So encouraged to see that. Want to continue to encourage PCEF to think about CTE, public schools. So I know there's a nexus here between workforce and the climate friendly schools. I think that's still not explicit, but I imagine as you're talking to employers, contractors, PGE utilities are going to say the same thing, exposing students in high school through CTE programs. That's just currently still underfunded. And then last is just more of actually a question. For strategic plan 4, funding that goes to programs that are administered by Prosper, are those limited to urban renewal areas? Those Okay, just wanted to clarify that those aren't restricted to.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think where we started, and you know, I think the way the conversation started with Prosper is we started with recognizing that we've got places where we've recognized groups like Portland Bureau of Transportation, the Portland Housing Bureau, Portland Parks and Recreation have unique roles in being able to implement and support programs given what they have. And I think with Prosper, you know, what we acknowledge is there's still some homework and some work that we've got to do together to figure out what that overlap looks like, including, Remfis, to your point, yes, a lot of their resources are focused in the tax increment financing geographic areas, but they're not restricted from, they're not restricted only to there. It's, you know, it's the flavor of money that they happen to be using. You know, they certainly get allocations from city council, ARPA funds, other funds that they deploy in other parts of the city. And so I think what we wanted to make sure is we preserve the opportunity in the space to follow up and have those discussions to say, is there an alignment opportunity here? But I just want to name that we're not, by certainly writing that in, it would create the potential. I think that we've got to still tease out, does that sort of partnership make sense, or should we be looking at private sector contractors to implement those programs?
Got it. One last question that kind of jogged. Thanks for that clarification. Going back to sort of workforce and career components. So I think including existing programs like Prosper or City of Portland's co-op program makes sense. Kind of encouragement to include Work Systems Inc. So I know there's kind of a nexus there. I know Work Systems has been a grantee, has been a contractor. They wear many hats, but one of the hats they do wear is sort of a regional workforce investment board. So as you think about some of those projects I highlighted earlier, especially Intel, you know, that is outside of our sort of scope within PCEF, but Intel, you know, as a workforce investment board, are thinking about career pipelines for those projects. So just another consideration to be inclusive of other groups there.
Thank you.
Any other comments? And again, going back to the discussion questions, you know, is there anything that would make it stronger for recommendations when it goes to council? And then the second question, is there something that stands out as a potential obstacle? Maria, do you have?
For council, we have to continue telling them the story of this journey and reminding them how people have weighed in, how we've listened, how we've improved upon the comments they've given, and that also the plan is not forever and done. We have opportunities to continue improving upon it and making more room and space for other people to make sure this is a plan that really reflects the needs of the city in this climate crisis and in this economic crisis and all of the injustices we're seeing in the city of Portland, even beyond climate and clean energy. I think it's a story we have to get other people to tell too, that other community stakeholders have to help us and step up and share how they support it as well, whether it's, you know, people who directly see themselves in the strategic programs or people who seek to benefit from it. But we just need as many allies to champion the work we've done so far, because from what I know, they were a part of it too.
I just want to add to what Maria just shared. You know, I think really thankful for the work that PCEF team has done in balancing not just the feedback from the community, but also the feedback from city council and bureau. Like, I think this work is going to be a balance, and I think it's really important that we as a committee continue to cultivate a relationship with council members. And I think to Maria's point, like, share that story, share what we're doing, remind them what the programs are doing. I know Megan did a really good job of sort of being the encyclopedia of everything that's in the program, and Robin and Faith, I'll let them speak for themselves. Like, I think did a really good job of talking to council. But I think one of the themes that I think we took away is, you know, they are managing and doing a lot of the work within the city. We are more immersed in this work, and we need to continue to share the story and the good work and how their feedback is being incorporated here. Additionally, I think it's really, you know, continues to be critical that we continue to ask for balance for the needs of community members as we evolve this program. But also, continue in this relationship that's a two-way street. It's not just about feedback from council, but we also need council to enact policies. So I think James brought up a point, like how can we invest in, electric vehicle transmission projects if we can't address safety? There are, I think, additional policy levers that we need from city, council. I know roads is a statewide issue. The funding, for roads is declining. There needs to be policy solutions both at the city and state level. We, I think, play an important leg to the stool for climate action. But there are other legs as well that city has, both policy, economic development, and public works. I think it's important for us to remind city council and just build that relationship, build that trust, and continue that collaborative spirit, both at the council level, at the bureau level, but even with the broader community. So kind of just wanted to share that note. And I don't know if, Robin or Faith has anything to add in terms of those relationships with council, because they've been there in the front lines. But it definitely struck me this past couple months, just the importance of sharing that story that I think Maria just highlighted.
I don't have anything else to add. I agree with what Maria and Ranfis said. I do have a question. What if this is not approved by council?
I think, our work, this is good work. I think for anyone, and I think Ramfi said it, like it's on us. It's certainly on, and hopefully you all see it as part of your jobs as well, to speak to the work that has happened here, the voices that have chimed in on this. I don't question that. I think our work speaks for itself, and so I think we're going to need to continue moving forward with that. And the reality is that we've got a climate crisis on our hands. Council in many instances have reiterated that, supported that, and all the policies they've passed. And so I think we'll continue the conversation to understand what if there's feedback or areas of desires of changes, and at the same end, both based on the work that we've done with you all and the engagement we've done with others, I think it's important for everyone to be able to speak up and share all the folks that have engaged in this, all the experts that have plugged into this. So as long as we do our job well into communicating that, I feel fairly confident that we're on a good path.
But at the end of the day, this is political. and there's money that's involved that goes to the bureaus that they oversee. So, we can present the best story ever in terms of how this is community engaged, community led and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it may not make a difference. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be overly pessimistic. I just want to understand just the playing field.
Well, I think in the most literal sense, I think your job as a body has been to at least recommend this plan to council, and if they have other ideas or want to have alternative proposals, they're welcome to do so, right? That's within their prerogative. They have to explain why they're doing so, but they can do so. And so I think I would say that we'll move forward in some capacity. It's a matter of is what we're moving forward with responsive to all the pieces we set out to respond to have a plan that aligns with the PCEF values, to have a plan that is responsive to the critique or the recommendations that we sought to respond to in our audit that we received last year. And so, but absolutely, in the end of the day, council is the final decision maker, and so we will work with them in order to land this in a good place.
I'll just add, I think then, given what you just said, I think, I don't know the timeline as intimately as I'm sure you do, but, I think we should spend some time kind of fine-tuning, crafting that message and how it's delivered and all that type of stuff. I think that's just as important as what's in this document.
Yep, multiple thumbs up from me, Robin.
Yeah, I'll just share, I think in our meetings, that Megan and I had with other folks here, I think one ask we did have with each council member is to try to at least share what their comments are ahead of time. I think it's really important in a collaborative spirit to know what are the changes that we need and try to incorporate them at this stage. And so I hope council will continue to work that. I'm kind of an optimist that, I think this team can continue to do the refinement before we make that recommendation. But I think that would be a great, standard for the committee to continue to open that door and say, hey, we'd love to continue to have your feedback incorporated. Let's do what you're suggesting here in terms of not just refining the message, but also going further and say, let's refine the product here before we make the formal recommendation. And I think that's part of that is relationship building. To be frank, I think we have to build a trust with council members. They're trying to, put trust in us in this process. And I think without a relationship being built there, I think we have to continue doing that. So it does feel difficult, but I might be an optimist in staff's ability here. So just want to, just want to keep encouraging staff to get a good product before we make a recommendation.
Folks, you all have a hard job here, and we have a hard job, and I think part of that is listening to the dozens and dozens and hundreds of bits of feedback that have come in and making sense of it all, and putting it into the framework. And I think I think you're, Robin, you're absolutely right. I think Ramphis, you're right about continuing that communication so that we can elaborate on and explain, like, these are all the trade-offs. These are the things that we heard. These are all the pieces of input that we're balancing. And to figure out how to communicate that to folks that take information in bits and pieces of time because they're incredibly busy individuals. And so it absolutely goes without saying that communicating this product. And I think for a timeline check, we will, we have our smaller group meetings with you all next Thursday. So we have another chime in. We'll have other individual check-ins, and then we come back in a public space at PCC Southeast on July 20th. Once you all make those changes, we're going to go through and make all the visual edits, all the graphics, all of that work that's going to take some time. And we've got about a month built in there before we present the polished product. And send it over to council offices and get it on the agenda officially. And so we'll get our time, but we've got that time in between to make sure that we can make sure that this lands and is reflective of all the work that went into this, and the document reflects that both in the words, but in everything else, to capture the beauty of everything that came into this. So, yeah.
All right, well, we're ahead of schedule. Ciara, we'll turn it over to you in terms of committee roles and accountability.
Thank you. Thank you. We had a great work session at the beginning of June, and it was nice to have a little more space and time to roll through some of these big questions more slowly and deliberately. And one of the exercises we went through was to think about what the committee's role might be with CIP implementation. So how might it change? How do we need it to stay the same? What does committee envision as their role? And also, what does staff need for support? So the nature of how PCEF even works is going to change. And so that means all of us have to adapt with it. And so what I did is I took everything that you said and I dropped it into 5 buckets. And here they are. I wanted to capture the spirit of how you wanted to work with the PCEF staff. So some things you talked about were staying high level, being a source of accountability, providing guidance, and that we're all on the same team. And I think we've seen a lot of that today already. To the point of accountability, that was one thing that Sam mentioned that we're adding in the new draft, is to talk about how the committee's role specifically is around accountability along with other mechanisms. And then shaping the plan. So of course, there's a lot more to be decided. There'll be work plans that come out, and with a new program, having a committee member there to help determine what responds to the framework that we've created in terms of other investments. So with shaping, you all mentioned representing community needs, desires, and objectives, sorting out competing demands, protecting the purpose of the fund, oversight in the mode of learning and improving, and a resource to stay true to mission. And then for accountability, specifically developing a culture of productive accountability, getting updates on RFPs and results, of course, the important dashboard reporting and metrics. So as the team rolls out the reporting dashboard on all the programs over the next 6 months to a year, helping to iterate and make sure that that's showing the progress aspects that you're looking to track. Support decisions if a program needs additional direction or adjustment. So we see some of those already down the road. And then accountability around carbon reduction and community benefit with our priority populations. Some things we weren't sure about yet was what would the cadence of reporting be? And that isn't because I'll phrase that in the positive. We will be transparent throughout. The staff will be transparently sharing, reporting what they're doing, both for staying accountable to the community, but also as sort of an open source project for other communities that haven't had a project like this yet. But when it comes to reporting, every program is going to be on a different timeline. So we'll have to figure out how to make that make sense with not being plugged in every single day. So how could we group reporting in those work plans so that we can digest it at the same time, but also roll it out when we actually have metrics to discuss. So with that, reporting overall versus per program. And then our process for onboarding new committee members. There will be new committee members over the next few months. So this is just a draft too, because we want you to think about it in that context. And then how we meet. Of course, there's been 3 or maybe more different ways that we've been meeting over the past year. There's this meeting. There are the small groups that you all do at the beginning of the month. And then there was that work session. So we talked about whether we might want to do this meeting longer and less often, or keep it the same, or have a standing agenda perhaps that's consistent. Deeper engagement with certain parts via committees separate from this meeting. Creating an environment for additional learning throughout, and we have met that way in the past. And then remaining a resource for staff on direction, and also as a liaison between staff and other leadership and the community. So I wanted to introduce this to you, reflecting back your ideas, and see if there are other things that we should think about. Of course, we have a couple months to sort this out, but I wanted to be accountable to you for the ideas that you brought on June 2nd. Any comments, questions, clarifications, further ideas?
I have a couple comments. So in general, I like this. I think, I don't know what the timeline is, but to the extent that we can get the input of the new folks, committee members, I think not everything needs their input, because I know we thought about this a lot. But stuff like meeting and just more logistic stuff, I think it would be beneficial to get their input. I don't know. We have something like, they're not bylaws, but they're bylaws like for this committee. And so I don't know, with some of these changes, do we have to change those bylaws or whatever it's called? So something else to consider. I would always welcome more opportunities for community engagement for PCEF committee members. So to the extent that can be weaved in there, or woved, whatever, that would be helpful to me. And then I guess the final thing is the name of this committee. I think we're still officially the grant committee, but I don't think we're going to be involved that much with grants. So perhaps updating the name to reflect kind of what we're doing after this discussion. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. I want to address just one piece of your comments there, which is, yes, the committee does have bylaws, and in the July meeting, there's both bylaws and then also working agreements, which the working agreements have never been formally adopted by the committee, but there's been a subcommittee of Michael and Megan working on that, and so we'll be bringing those to you all as a committee in July. So there will be an opportunity to harmonize some minor elements of the bylaws and then adopt those working agreements that then fits into this new climate investment plan framework.
Any other comments or anyone else want to share? Ciara, if people have additional thoughts, should they just email you or should they email staff?
Yeah, you can email me directly and you can copy staff. I'll make sure that it gets back to me either way. And this is absolutely just bare bones. We'll keep developing it over the next few months as we get a better sense of the timeline for CIP implementation and also the new committee members. And in the meantime, we'll take another look at the bylaws and see if anything needs to be adjusted to make everything stronger. But thanks everyone for your feedback.
So Sam, I'm looking at you. We're ahead of schedule.
25
minutes.
I think, folks know we'll meet next week in small groups. So if there's anything else, it's almost, I'm looking to say, calling it once, twice, and we'll certainly hang back if individuals have questions here this evening. But otherwise, we look forward to connecting with you all in smaller groups next week and diving into some of this feedback and hearing any email feedback and receiving any email feedback as well. But if not that, then we'll catch you all in our next full committee meeting as a full group on July 20th.
Thank you so much for all the hard work.
Thank you. Michael, you shaved, didn't you?
I did.
All right, good night, everyone, and thank you for attending this evening.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, Faith.